In Nicaragua, you have a government which has came to power and I believe has tried to do the right things for its people in terms of health care, land reform, education. If you trace the history of the United States vis-a-vis Latin America and Central America, there has never been a time when a country made a revolution for the poor people where it was not overthrown by the CIA or the United States government or the Marines. Salvador Allende was democratically elected by the people of Chile. He made the mistake of believing that his job as president of that country was to represent the people of Chile. And he did his best, and he was overthrown by the CIA. So the interesting question is, why does the United States government think, whether it's Nicaragua or any other country in Latin or Central America, that it has the right to overthrow those governments? I think Congress, in a sense, no longer represents the ordinary people, and Congress is made up of the Democrats and Republicans. You know, people very often were yelling at the Republicans and Reagan, look at the horrible priorities he established, look at all the terrible things that he did to the poor people. But they forgot that both houses of the Congress for 4 out of Reagan's 8 years were controlled by the Democrats. So I think you have a bipartisan policy which essentially favors the rich at the expense of working people and the poor people.
I think one of the things that concerned me was the way that the United States government had always treated Latin America. And basically, as you know, our history has always been that we have the right to unilaterally get involved and overthrow governments that we don't like. President Roosevelt, back when he was president, when somebody said, well, why do you keep supporting all these horrible dictators, these people who oppress their people? He says, well, they may be sons of bitches, but they're our sons of bitches. That was exactly what he said. And, you know, I think at a certain point, one reaches the conclusion that if one believes in democracy, and that presumably is what our nation is supposed to be about, how can you defend the right that we can go in with the Marines, as we have on many, many occasions, and overthrow any government that we don't like? And then if you think a little bit further about it, and you study political science or economics, then you understand that time and time again, these interventions in Latin and Central America have been for the benefit of large corporations, whether it's the United Fruit Company in Guatemala, or the tin companies, or the copper companies in Chile. And you say, gee whiz, should foreign policy be made for the benefit of large corporations who want to exploit the people of Latin and Central America? Is that what America is about? I don't think it is. Sandinista government, in my view, has more support among the Nicaraguan people, substantially more support than Ronald Reagan has among the American people. And where there's also, I think, confusion on the part of some people in the United States is even people who voted against the Sandinista government. They voted for somebody else for president. Do you think that that means that they're going to support an invasion of their own country? I mean, it's like saying, I voted against Ronald Reagan. That does not mean to say that I want to see an invasion of the United States to get rid of Ronald Reagan. We will deal with our own internal politics in our own way. I hope we will vote Reagan out and reactionary Republicans out. That does not mean to say we want an invasion. And I think many people in Nicaragua feel the same way. They say, hey, I don't like the Sandinista government, but don't invade our country. We're going to have to stand with them because we're an independent people.
So you think that the notion of a civil war running rife in that country is a misconception?
Oh, God. It's the same thing, you know, they never learn. You may recall way back in, 1961, they invaded Cuba. And everybody was totally convinced that Castro was the worst guy in the world, that all the Cuban people were going to rise up in rebellion against Fidel Castro. They had forgot that he educated their kids, gave them health care, totally transformed the society. You know, not to say that Fidel Castro or Cuba are perfect. They are certainly not. But just because Ronald Reagan dislikes these people does not mean to say that the people in their own nations feel the same way. So they expected a tremendous uprising in Cuba. It never came. And if they are expecting a tremendous uprising in Nicaragua, they are very, very, very mistaken. I spoke to Ortega, and I asked him this question, and I said, if the United States government stopped funding the countries, how long do you think they would last? You know, and he went, they wouldn't last very long. What you're talking about is the United States invasion of another nation. Without the support of the United States government, these people would be gone very, very quickly. And I think that that's clear to understand. You're not talking about a civil war, massive discontent. You're talking about a small number of people, very heavily armed, trained, and financed by the United States of America.
Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras. And they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there, for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Bolin Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. The airport in question and all the events in question were the subject of state and federal inquiries. It was primarily a matter for federal jurisdiction. The state really had next to nothing to do with it. The local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based on what was within the jurisdiction of state law. The rest of it was under jurisdiction of the United States attorneys who were appointed successively by previous administrations. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.
May all the Democrats forgive me this close to the election. I love George Bush. I do. And this man whom I'd always liked and respected and then run against in a painful campaign in some ways, I literally came to love.
My mother calls me my fourth brother. Calls him my fourth brother.
Is that right? The black sheep of the family. That Barbara began to refer to me as her black sheep son. You know, the one that strays. There's one in every family. Gets the politics wrong or makes some other mistake. He can virtually do no wrong in my eyes, even though he, every 5 years, makes me look like a wimp by insisting on continuing to jump out of airplanes. I love you.
Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Bolin Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false.
We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.